Death in most tabletop RPGs is always a painful, heart-wrenching experience for everyone involved. The game has you going through months worth, sometimes years worth of character development, all to have it cut short by your DM and whatever evil shenanigans they had planned that day. Your character goes through all the physical pain, everyone else needs to deal with the mental pain of losing them, and the player needs to shed tears of sorrow as they whip up their new character sheet. Death is usually the secondary stake in most campaigns, and some methods of dying are just way worse than others. Just like in real life, being steamrolled by a train is much more preferable to being burnt alive. Weird choice of comparison, but I digress. Just so happens that D&D has a lot of creepy mythical monsters and powerful magics that can instill pain and suffering infinitely worse. In this video, we'll be ranking the 10 worst ways to die in D&D 5e, and although we're starting at the least egregious methods first, do keep in mind that out of the thousands of different rules in this game, only choosing 10 already puts us at the cream of the crop. This is the 10 worst ways to die in D&D. Prepare for a ride. Number 10. The Hand and Eye of Vecna. When the hand is grafted to your arm stub and the eye is placed into your socket, these two lich artifacts can be used to turn people's bones to jelly. I can only imagine the intense internal pain and suffering as your body liquefies from the inside, muscles distort and collapse, and you just fold into yourself. It instantly drops you to 0 hit points, so the pain is only as long as you remain succeeding death saves. There also aren't any rules for how you'd go about restoring your bones, making the overall amount of pain a coin toss on if they'd be fixed after a long rest or require a much more taxing procedure. Although the total amount of quantified suffering at the hand of the Vecna item duo shouldn't be understated, they're artifact level items after all, capable of the most infamous killing methods on this list. But before we continue, huge props to Factor for sponsoring this video. As an epic gamer myself, the last thing I want to be bothered with is getting hungry and having to cook an entire meal from scratch. Factor's fresh, ready-made, non-frozen meals are delivered right to your doorstep. Just chuck them in the fridge and snag one out when you're feeling peckish to refuel and get right back to whatever that important thing you were doing was. The menu is updated weekly to ensure new options are always flowing through. So if you want to improve your eating habits and speed up your meals, use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code FACTOR SE32938 for 50% off your first box. Let's get back into this video, but thanks to Factor for sponsoring it. Number 9. Gelatinous Cubes. Although Vecna only turns bones to jelly, gelatinous cubes tend to do the exact opposite. They'll slurp you up and turn you into jelly as their entire body is composed of an acidic substance. In a few short moments, your skin will melt, then fat, then muscle, leaving your bones inside as a grim reminder for what happens when you get caught up in one of these ooze monsters. Although many other creatures are more than capable of digesting their prey, the monster manual goes out of its way to describe a death by a gelatinous cube to be slow and torturous, and for good reason. Jelly cubes have some of the highest damage output with their digestion trait, making absolutely sure you don't bleed out before getting to experience the very last moment it breaks apart your internal organs. Number 8. Red Slaads. Some wouldn't call this method of death particularly painful, but the vile description of events that take place for it to fully occur is enough to place it at number 7. When a red slaad claws a humanoid, it sticks a small egg into the gash wound that wiggles on inside and lays dormant in the host's body. For 3 months, it grows into a small baby slaad, giving its host pregnancy pains for 24 hours before birth. Afterwards, in one swift motion, the baby slaad chews through their vital organs, burrowing through their chest cavity and violently killing the host in the process. In that moment, it's 6 seconds of pure agony, and once the baby's newfound life is extinguished at the hands of the party, and the group begins investigating into the reason behind why this occurred, it's only downhill from there. The first time I learned about how red slaads played, it shook me to my core, and I could only imagine the sheer horror it inflict on characters in-game forced to witness it. Truly a brain rattler of a situation, and one that if it wasn't written in the official books, players would have every right to believe was some weird impregnation stuff the DM's into. Not a fun situation for anyone involved, so let's move on. Number 7. Exhaustion. Ah yes, being killed by the environment is always one of the most riveting ways for a character to die. Exhaustion due to starvation, dehydration, burning heats, and blistering colds can always take their toll. Either as a long drawn-out sapping of energy if, for say, you're walking around the UK without a jacket on for a few days straight, to death in a single minute if you somehow find yourself teleported next to the mouth of an active volcano. Out of all the conditions in D&D, exhaustion is the rarest to become afflicted by, mostly in the nature of how most DMs use it in their their games, by that I mean rarely, but through certain afflictions remains as one of the worst ways to die. I say that just because some cartoon I watched a while back that I can't for the life of me remember the name of mentioned freezing to death being the best way to go. And if that's true, would need to be partially excused from this list. Starvation has a lot of mental-based afflictions which can drive people mad, and intense heat throws your entire body out of whack, making death by long-term effects like these nasty demises overall. Number 6. Gas spores. Gas spores are the floating aberrant fungus grown on a beholder's corpse. With a bit of sentience and some traits reminiscing of its old hosts, such as the ability to float in the air and have a little eyeball to see the beautiful world with, and for finding its victims, the gas spores bump into organic creatures to infest them with the spores covering its body. These spores invade your immune system and infect you with a crippling disease that'll have you wishing you were dead throughout it all. Gas spores are some of the only D&D creatures that spread a disease actually capable of killing D&D characters, as most other forms of disease in D&D are only really threatening to poor people that lack godly magic. Gas spores kill their victims anywhere between instantly to 17 hours, sometimes taking longer if you have godly levels of constitution, but even then you're only snagging a few extra hours to your suffering. Anyone who's gotten sick without getting a proper vaccine before may recall getting some near-death symptoms. Well, that's always the case with gas spores, as nobody makes vaccines against them, and they kill you so fast that no immune system could ever stand a chance. It's gonna hurt like all heck, as in just a few minutes you'll be feeling the same death-like grip on your body as what Omicron does to people in over a week. It'll be one of the worst handful of hours in your lifetime, all while you desperately search for someone capable of treating you, all while you're stuck in the middle of what I'd assume to be a long-dead beholder's monster-infested lair. Number 5. Hellfire weapons. Humanoids killed by any weapon with the Hellfire enchantment have their souls forfeit to the River Styx, being dragged to one of the lairs of hell and being reincarnated as a Lemure Devil, a disgusting flesh mound of a monster with no recollection of its previous self or purpose. The official books describe a common Lemure's lifestyle as doomed to suffer, considering we have the Descent into Avernus module that lets the party travel through the first lair of hell, Avernus, and that same module is the one that introduced these items into the game. There's a good chance Avernus is the lair your DM is dropping you into, which honestly isn't all that bad. People willingly go to Avernus all the time to commit acts against humanity, become gang members intercepting lowly adventurers like a pirate crew, or in the case of the wizard Mordenkainen himself, do some sightseeing. Certainly a brutal environment to live in, but the death itself isn't all that painful when compared to others. It's just being sliced by a weapon after all, and you're reincarnated without any of your old memories anyway, so you don't even remember it. Having to live as an ageless mound of flesh for all eternity in hell is where the kicker is though, making the consequences from dying some of the worst so far. Number 4. Feeblemind. Many people consider the death of the mind to be akin to death itself. Feeblemind is a destructive spell that steals away the core of your character's being while forcing you to remain playing as them. It's an evil spell both towards the player and character. You become akin to an animal companion in terms of intelligence, limitations, and perception of the world, with most DMs making the solution to healing you a multiple session long quest if you don't have a cleric to quickly remove the effects. Until then, your character's true self is essentially dead, and the player is locked into playing this primal variation until the DM throws them a bone. Many players recount their first experience at the receiving end of this spell as one of the most destructive times against their characters, traumatizing them from then on out to always ensure they have faster methods to restore the minds of their party from then on out. Feeblemind doesn't just affect the person it's cast on, but fundamentally reshapes the way parties play D&D. The effect it brings to the table, all compacted into a 5th level spell slot, should never be underestimated, making Feeblemind a top pick for any morbid spellcasters looking to inflict a punishment worse than death as soon as possible. Number 3. Regeneration. Who would have thought an ability that gives you infinite health over a period of time would actually be the reason for some of the most gruesome methods of torture to exist? Certainly not me, as someone who's homebrewed a troll torture chamber before, where a branding iron would repeatedly strike against the troll every few rounds, preventing it from regenerating too much and keeping it in a permanent near-death-like state forever. The faster you can heal, the more agonizing the methods to make you endlessly suffer can be. It's like the Eternity Devil in Chainsaw Man. You can hack and slash at it for eternity, turning what was once a blessing of health into eternal torment. If you haven't watched the show yet, that was your minor spoiler push to do so after this. But yeah, if you have any form of fast-acting regeneration, do whatever you can to avoid being captured and put in a situation like this. Because nobody wants to have to make a new character on the grounds that their last one's story ended as the DM described they were endlessly consumed by a giant octopus for the remainder of the campaign. Talk about an infinite food glitch, am I right? Number 2. Weird. Whatever your mind chooses to believe is the worst way to die is usually much more painful than what the majority of sheeple think is significantly worse. Although there are certainly types of suffering that some people have yet to even begin to fathom, usually our worst nightmares will have to do. Weird is a 9th level spell that plays into exactly that, conjuring up your literal sleep paralysis demon to relentlessly haunt you for the duration. The sheer trauma of this spell deals psychic damage every turn, and can last long enough to kill creatures with a low wisdom score. Overall, a truly devastating way to go, but the fact that it's limited to the affected creature's personal fears can sometimes make it less than impactful. For, let's say, a goblin who's terrified of dying by getting hit in the head with a rock, there's scarier things out there, you know, but the spell isn't out here trying to educate its victims, just kill them with fear. And at number 1, we have the Wish spell. Described as the mightiest spell a mortal creature can cast, Wish is the most common way to inflict the worst suffering imaginable to a creature short of divine punishment. What horrific methods of enacting misery are chosen is entirely up to the caster, making the person using this spell the judge, jury, and executioner. It's one of the rarest ways to be killed in D&D, especially by an NPC, and due to the monkey pawn shenanigans of the DM. But when it works to a traumatizing degree. The important thing here is to have an impeccable repertoire of knowledge on the creature you plan to use it on beforehand, so you can perfectly execute your wish to go above and beyond even what they'd consider to be the worst way to go. Otherwise, you're just assuming that they'd find whatever you chose to be significantly worse than whatever the weird spell would have conjured up, which won't always be the case. I'm basically starting a new channel series every week, but if this one was surprisingly fun to watch, I'd appreciate you liking and sharing it around. Quite the contrary, I've been plain simple, and check out my cool anime-inspired 5e book if that kind of stuff is down your alley. Look, the pages are hard to flip with these gloves on, but everything in here was written by me and hand-drawn by a handful of independent artists. Once again, the link to check it out is in the description below. But that's all for today, and I'll see you all in the next video.